I never thought a box of old wedding mementos could shatter my world. But there I was, crouched on the floor of our attic, surrounded by a decade of memories I had no idea were about to turn toxic. Sarah had sent me up here to find our holiday decorations. That's how it always started, some innocent chore, a harmless request. "Grab the wreath, will you?" she'd asked earlier, flashing that easy smile I used to think was the purest thing in my life. I found the wreath, buried under piles of dusty boxes labeled with years gone by. But just as I was about to head back downstairs, something caught my eye. A worn cardboard box with wedding stuff scrawled on the side in black marker. We hadn't looked at that stuff in years. Life had gotten busy, careers, moving houses, and raising our two kids. But something pulled me toward it, like a thread I couldn't help but tug. Inside were the usual keepsakes: dried flowers from Sarah's bouquet, a guest book filled with messages from friends and family, our vows written on crinkled stationery. I smiled faintly, tracing the faded ink of my own handwriting. And then I saw it. The DVD, labeled simply, "Sarah and Matt's Wedding." Full footage. I couldn't help myself. Nostalgia has a funny way of sneaking up on you when you least expect it. I dusted off the cover and carried it downstairs, popping it into the old player we kept for moments like this. The screen flickered to life, and there we were. 10 years younger, impossibly happy, and blissfully unaware of the storms life had waiting for us. Sarah looked radiant in her lace gown, her dark hair swept up in elegant curls. I remembered the way my heart had raced when I saw her for the first time that day. She was everything I had ever wanted, standing there in front of me, promising forever. The videographer, Greg, had done an incredible job capturing every moment. He was a friend of Sarah's from college, a quiet, artsy guy with an eye for detail. I barely knew him back then, but Sarah had insisted he was the best choice, and he was. Watching the footage, I found myself smiling despite the nagging stress that had become a permanent fixture in my life lately. Work pressures, bills piling up, the usual grind of adulthood. It all faded away as I relived that perfect day. But then something strange happened. The camera lingered on Sarah for just a little too long. At first I thought it was just artistic flair, a cinematic choice to emphasize the beauty of the bride. But as the video continued, I noticed more moments like that. Greg's lens seemed fixated on her, capturing every glance, every smile, every fleeting expression. A chill ran down my spine, but I brushed it off. I was reading too much into it. It was just a wedding video, for God's sake. Still, a seed of doubt had been planted. I fast-forwarded to the reception, the screen blurring with motion until it settled on the dance floor. Sarah was laughing, her cheeks flushed as she twirled in my arms. The camera panned out, capturing the guests clapping and cheering around us. And then Greg's voice cut through the music. "You look amazing, Sarah," he said, barely audible over the noise. My hand froze on the remote. Sarah laughed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Thanks, Greg," she said, her voice warm and familiar. It was nothing, I told myself. Just friendly banter. But then there was a look, subtle, fleeting, but undeniable. Greg's camera lingered on her face, capturing an expression I couldn't quite place. And Sarah, she didn't pull away from it. My chest tightened. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was overthinking harmless moments frozen in time. But the unease wouldn't leave me. The video ended, fading to black with a soft hum. I sat there in the dim light of the living room, my mind racing. I needed to know more. That night, after Sarah had gone to bed, I found myself scrolling through old emails, searching for any correspondence between her and Greg. Most of it was mundane, wedding details, scheduling updates. But then I found one from 6 months after the wedding. The subject line read, "Thanks for everything." I clicked on it, my heart pounding in my chest. The message was short but unsettling. "Hey Greg, just wanted to say thanks again for capturing our special day. You really went above and beyond. Hope you're doing well." Sarah Gregg's reply was what made my stomach drop. "It was my pleasure, Sarah. You know I'd do anything for you." I read the email 3 times, each pass stinging more than the last. "You know I'd do anything for you." The words clung to my thoughts like a dark cloud, heavy with implications I couldn't shake. Maybe it was harmless. a friendly sentiment between old college acquaintances. But the uneasy knot in my gut told me otherwise. I stared at the screen, my breathing shallow. The logical part of me tried to brush it off. People are dramatic in emails sometimes, I reasoned. Maybe Greg was just being polite. But another voice, quieter and more insistent, whispered a different story. There's more to this than you think. I closed the laptop, my hands clammy with sweat. I wanted to let it go, to bury the doubt and move on like a reasonable person. Sarah had never given me a reason not to trust her, not before tonight, at least. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. The next day at work, I could barely focus. Spreadsheets blurred together, meetings passed in a fog, and my responses were automatic at best. My thoughts kept circling back to that email, dissecting every word, every possible meaning. By the time I got home, I was wound tighter than a spring. Sarah was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. She looked up and smiled when she saw me. "Hey," she said brightly, "how was your day?" "Fine," I lied, forcing a smile. I watched her move around the kitchen with ease like nothing had changed. Her dark hair was pulled into a loose bun, a few strands framing her face. She looked like the same woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. Warm, kind, effortlessly beautiful. But now there was a crack in the image, a sliver of doubt I couldn't unsee. We ate dinner together, making small talk about the kids' school projects and weekend plans. I nodded in the right places, laughed when I was supposed to, but my mind was elsewhere. After the dishes were cleared and the kids were tucked into bed, I found myself back at the laptop, scrolling through more emails between Sarah and Greg. Most were mundane, just like before. But then I found another thread from 2 years after the wedding. The subject line read, "Catching up?" My pulse quickened as I opened it. "Hey Sarah, it's been a while. I'm going to be in town next weekend. Thought it might be nice to catch up. Let me know if you're free." Her reply came less than an hour later. "Hey Greg, that sounds great. Let's grab coffee. Saturday works for me." There was nothing overtly suspicious about the exchange, but it gnawed at me anyway. Why hadn't she mentioned this to me? We told each other everything, or at least I thought we did. I scrolled further, my heart sinking as I found more emails over the years. They weren't frequent, but they were consistent enough to form a pattern. Friendly check-ins, casual invitations to meet up, compliments that felt just a little too personal. And then there was the last one, dated just 6 months ago. Greg had attached a photo, a candid shot of Sarah laughing, her head thrown back in pure joy. The caption read, "Still my favorite smile." I slammed the laptop shut, my jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. What the hell is this? The room felt suffocating, the walls closing in around me. I needed answers, but I didn't know how to ask the questions without tearing everything apart. I paced the living room, my thoughts racing. Confronting Sarah felt like stepping off a cliff without a parachute. What if I was wrong? What if I was overreacting to harmless interactions? But what if I wasn't? I sat down heavily on the couch, my head in my hands. Memories of our wedding day flashed through my mind. The vows we exchanged, the promises we made. "Forever," she had said, her voice trembling with emotion, but forever suddenly felt fragile, breakable. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to think rationally. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe this was just a misunderstanding fueled by my own insecurities. But the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. I needed to know the truth. Sleep was impossible that night. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every suspicious moment I'd uncovered. The emails, the photo caption, the lingering glances from the wedding footage that I hadn't thought twice about until now. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. I had to confront Sarah, even if the answers tore us apart. I waited until after the kids were dropped off at school. The house was quiet, filled only with the faint hum of the dishwasher and the occasional creak of floorboards. Sarah was at the kitchen table, sipping her coffee and scrolling through her phone, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I stood in the doorway, my heart pounding against my ribs. "Sarah," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. She looked up, smiling faintly. "Hey, what's up?" I took a breath, clenching my fists at my sides. "We need to talk." Her brow furrowed, concern flickering across her face. Sure. What's going on? I walked over to the table and sat down across from her, the weight of what I was about to say pressing heavily on my chest. I was going through some old stuff last night, I began, choosing my words carefully. The wedding box in the attic. She tilted her head, curious. Oh, yeah? Find anything interesting? I nodded slowly. The wedding DVD. I watched it. Her smile faltered, and for a brief moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Nervousness, maybe? Guilt? It was nice, I continued, my voice tightening. Brought back a lot of memories. She forced a smile. Yeah, Greg did a great job with that video. There it was, his name hanging in the air like a trigger. I leaned forward, my voice low. Speaking of Greg, I found some emails. Her expression shifted instantly. Confusion, then defensiveness. Emails? Yeah, I said, my jaw clenched. From him to you. Over the years. She set her coffee down, the clink of the mug against the table unnervingly loud. Matt, what are you talking about? Greg was just a friend. We barely even kept in touch. I shook my head, frustration bubbling to the surface. That's not what it looked like. I saw the photo he sent, the one with the caption about your smile. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she seemed genuinely shocked. That was nothing. He was being friendly. Friendly? I repeated bitterly. Sarah, he said he'd do anything for you. That doesn't sound like just a friend. She exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. Look, I don't know what you think this is, but you're blowing it out of proportion. Greg and I never... I cut her off, my voice trembling with anger. Then why didn't you tell me about meeting up with him? Why keep it a secret if it was so innocent? There was a long, heavy silence. Sarah looked down at her hands, her jaw tightening. I didn't think it was a big deal, she said finally, her voice quieter now. He's an old friend, that's all. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted so badly to believe that this was just a misunderstanding. But the doubts gnawed at me, relentless and unyielding. If it was nothing, I said slowly, then why do I feel like you're hiding something? Her eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of frustration and something else I couldn't quite place. Fear, maybe. I'm not hiding anything, she insisted. You have to trust me. But that was the problem, wasn't it? Trust. It had always been the foundation of our marriage, the thing that kept us strong even through the rough patches. And now it felt like that foundation was cracking beneath our feet. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. I need some air, I muttered, my voice strained. Matt, she started, but I shook my head. Just give me a minute, I said, walking toward the front door. The cool morning air hit my face as I stepped outside, but it did nothing to calm the storm inside me. I leaned against the porch railing, my mind racing. Maybe Sarah was telling the truth. Maybe I really was overreacting. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story, something she wasn't telling me, and I wasn't sure I was ready to find out what it was. I stayed outside longer than I should have, leaning against the railing as the chill bit through my shirt. My breath clouded in the crisp morning air, but my thoughts were anything but clear. Every second replayed the conversation inside, the defensive tone in Sarah's voice, the strange flicker of fear in her eyes. This wasn't nothing. When I finally went back inside, Sarah had moved to the living room, sitting stiffly on the couch. Her coffee sat untouched on the table, cooling. She didn't look up when I walked in, but the tension in her body spoke volumes. I sat down on the opposite end of the couch, leaving a chasm of space between us. Can we just talk about this like adults? I asked, my voice steady but brittle. She sighed heavily, folding her arms across her chest. I already told you, Matt. There's nothing going on with Greg. I rubbed my temples, frustration bubbling under my skin. Then help me understand, I said, keeping my voice calm, despite the anger threatening to surface. Why the emails? Why the photo? And why didn't you tell me about meeting up with him? Her jaw tightened. Because I knew you'd react like this, she shot back. You always get jealous over the smallest things. That stung, but I didn't flinch. This isn't jealousy, Sarah. This is about honesty, trust. She shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting away from mine. Look, she said after a long pause, Greg reached out a while back. He was going through some stuff, a divorce. He needed someone to talk to. And you were that someone, I asked pointedly. She nodded, her expression softening slightly. Yes, we were friends once, Matt. I didn't see the harm in catching up. But you didn't tell me, I pressed. You hid it. Why? Her silence spoke louder than any excuse she could have given. Did you sleep with him? I asked bluntly, my voice low and raw. Her head snapped up, eyes wide with shock. No, God, no, she said vehemently. How could you even ask that? Because none of this makes sense. I exploded, unable to hold back any longer. You're keeping secrets, Sarah. And it's not just Greg. It's the way you've been distant lately. The late nights, the phone you always keep glued to your hand. I'm not stupid. Tears welled in her eyes, but I forced myself to stay focused. I wasn't going to be manipulated by emotion. Not this time. You don't get it, she whispered, her voice trembling. Then help me get it, I demanded. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. Instead, she stood up abruptly and walked toward the window, wrapping her arms around herself. The morning light streamed through the glass, casting a pale glow over her tense figure. I didn't want to hurt you, she said finally, her back still turned to me. A cold weight settled in my chest. What does that mean? She took a shaky breath. Greg was there for me when you weren't. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. When I wasn't, I repeated, my voice hoarse. You've been so caught up in work, in everything but us, she said quietly. I felt invisible, Matt, like I didn't matter anymore. I stared at her, disbelief and anger warring inside me. So you turned to Greg. It wasn't like that, she insisted, turning to face me. He was just someone who listened, that's all. But the cracks in her story were too big to ignore. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more. Something she wasn't saying. I don't buy it, I said flatly. If it was so innocent, why all the secrecy? Why didn't you just tell me? She wiped a tear from her cheek, her expression hardened now. Because I knew you'd react like this. You always think the worst of me. The accusation stung, but I refused to back down. This isn't about thinking the worst, Sarah. This is about honesty, trust. And right now, I don't know if I can trust you. Her lips trembled, but she stood her ground. I never cheated on you, Matt, she said firmly. Believe that or don't, but it's the truth. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted so badly for this to be some misunderstanding, for everything to go back to the way it was before. But deep down, I knew that things would never be the same. The cracks in our marriage had been exposed, and no amount of reassurance could patch them up. I need some time, I said finally, my voice hollow. To think. She nodded slowly, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Take all the time you need, she said quietly. As I walked toward the door, I felt the weight of our shattered trust pressing heavily on my chest. The truth was still out there, lurking in the shadows, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to face it. The house was unbearably quiet after that conversation. I left for work, but the weight of everything lingered like a thick fog around me. My thoughts spiraled through every possible scenario as I tried to focus on mundane tasks and meetings that suddenly felt meaningless. Had I been blind all this time? Was Sarah telling the truth, or was I just another clueless husband ignoring the cracks in his own marriage until they became canyons? By the time I returned home that evening, Sarah had already put the kids to bed. She was curled up on the couch with a book, though her eyes weren't moving across the page. The tension between us sat thick in the air, heavy and palpable. Hey, I muttered, more out of habit than desire to engage. Hey, she echoed softly without looking up. We were strangers in our own home now, separated by an invisible wall neither of us knew how to break down. After a moment's hesitation, I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. The cold liquid did nothing to wash away the bitterness that clung to my throat. I needed answers, something concrete to either validate my fears or put them to rest once and for all. That's when it hit me. The emails from Greg weren't just casual pleasantries. They referenced specific moments, meetings, conversations, times Sarah hadn't mentioned to me. If I could piece together those dates, maybe I'd find clarity. I set the glass down with a sharp clink and made my way upstairs to the home office. Sarah didn't ask where I was going, and I didn't offer an explanation. Once inside, I booted up the desktop computer and opened my email account. My fingers trembled slightly as I navigated to Sarah's contact list, searching for Greg's name. Bingo. I found the string of messages almost immediately, dating back to well before his supposed divorce. There were gaps, though, periods where their correspondence abruptly stopped, only to pick up again months later. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. If I wanted real answers, I'd need more than just these emails. My eyes drifted to the bookshelf across the room, where rows of neatly labeled binders held years of family memories, photo albums, tax records, even itineraries for past vacations. Among them was a binder labeled Wedding in Sarah's meticulous handwriting. I stood up and pulled it from the shelf, the weight of it heavier than I remembered. Flipping through the pages, I saw everything from seating charts to vendor contracts. Greg's name was there, of course, listed as our videographer, along with his business details and payment information. My stomach churned as I stared at his name. I tried to remember what I'd thought of him back then, a friendly, talented guy with an easy smile and a camera always slung over his shoulder. He hadn't stood out as anything more than a professional doing his job. But now I couldn't look at his name without feeling a wave of nausea. Toward the back of the binder, I found a receipt for a follow-up session we'd done with Greg 6 months after the wedding. I'd almost forgotten about it, a short video montage he'd created for our first anniversary. Sarah had insisted on it. I'd thought it was sweet at the time, a thoughtful way to relive the happiest day of our lives. But now I wondered if there had been another reason entirely. I flipped to the next page and froze. Tucked between 2 sheets of paper was a handwritten note in Sarah's familiar cursive. Greg, thank you for making that day unforgettable. You really are the best. Love, S. Love, S. The words burned into my brain, each letter a dagger, twisting deeper into my chest. My breathing grew shallow as I tried to convince myself it meant nothing, just a friendly note of appreciation. But combined with everything else, it felt like confirmation of my worst fears. I stuffed the binder back onto the shelf and paced the room, my heart racing. This wasn't proof of an affair, but it was enough to shatter any illusions I had left about Sarah's innocence. I needed more. Grabbing my phone, I scrolled through old messages between Sarah and me from around the time of our wedding. There were gaps, times when she'd gone silent for hours or even days, claiming she was busy with wedding stuff. Busy with what, exactly? A sudden, desperate thought struck me. The external hard drive. Years ago, Greg had given us a backup of all the raw footage from the wedding on a sleek black drive. It had been gathering dust in the back of the closet ever since. I bolted downstairs and rummaged through the closet until I found it, buried beneath a pile of forgotten electronics. Back in the office, I plugged it into the computer, my hands shaking. The drive whirred to life, revealing a series of folders neatly labeled by date and event. I clicked on the folder marked Wedding Not Raw Footage. Video after video popped up on the screen, hours of footage I'd never bothered to watch. I opened the first file, my heart pounding as the screen filled with familiar faces and scenes from that day. But I wasn't looking for smiling guests or heartfelt speeches. I was looking for something, anything, that would either confirm my suspicions or prove me wrong. And as the first video played, I braced myself for whatever truth lay hidden within those frames. The room was dark except for the pale glow of the computer screen. I sat frozen, eyes locked on the wedding footage playing in front of me. Familiar scenes unfolded. Sarah walking down the aisle, her smile radiant, guests dabbing at their eyes. My younger self grinning like a fool as I waited to take her hand. It should have been a beautiful reminder of one of the happiest days of my life. Instead, it felt like I was watching a crime scene, dissecting every second for hidden meaning. I fast-forwarded through the familiar shots. Ceremony, toasts, dancing. Greg's skill with the camera was undeniable. He captured moments I hadn't even noticed at the time. The way Sarah's veil fluttered in the breeze. The way sunlight caught the champagne glasses during the reception. But I wasn't here to appreciate his artistry. I was hunting for a different kind of evidence. I scrubbed through hours of footage, my frustration growing with each passing clip. Nothing seemed out of place. Maybe I really was losing my mind, connecting dots that weren't there. Then I found it, a file near the bottom of the folder, tucked away with no label except a random string of numbers. I clicked on it, my heart pounding in my chest. The screen flickered, and suddenly I was staring at a shot I didn't recognize. A dimly lit room, clearly not part of the wedding venue. The audio crackled faintly as the camera adjusted focus. And then I saw them. Sarah and Greg. They were seated on a couch, laughing softly. Sarah's head was tilted back, her smile wide and genuine. Greg leaned closer, his hand resting casually on her knee. My stomach clenched into a knot. This wasn't footage meant for anyone else to see. The timestamp in the corner revealed it had been recorded months after the wedding, during the supposed anniversary shoot Sarah had insisted on. "You're crazy," Sarah was saying between laughs. Greg grinned. "Takes one to know one." There was a pause, heavy with unspoken tension. "I don't know what I'd do without you," Sarah said quietly, her tone suddenly serious. "You'll never have to find out," Greg replied, his voice low. And then it happened. He leaned in, and she didn't pull away. Their lips met in a slow, deliberate kiss that shattered whatever fragile hope I'd been clinging to. I couldn't breathe. The betrayal played out on the screen like some twisted nightmare, each frame driving the knife deeper into my chest. I slammed the laptop shut, the sound echoing through the room. My hands trembled as rage and heartbreak battled for dominance inside me. How long had this been going on? Had everything between us been a lie? Footsteps sounded behind me, and I turned to see Sarah standing in the doorway, her face pale. "Matt?" she asked cautiously. "What are you doing?" I stood up slowly, my body rigid with anger. "You want to tell me what the hell this is?" I demanded, my voice low and dangerous. Her eyes flicked to the closed laptop, understanding dawning in an instant. "Matt, I can explain." "Don't," I cut her off sharply. "Don't you dare lie to me again." She took a step forward, desperation etched into every line of her face. "It was a mistake," she said quickly. "It didn't mean anything." I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow and broken. "A mistake? You don't accidentally kiss someone, Sarah, and you sure as hell don't record it." Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt nothing but cold fury. "How long?" I demanded. "How long has this been going on?" She hesitated, and that split second of silence told me everything I needed to know. "Since the anniversary shoot," she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head, disbelief crashing over me. "Why? Why would you do this?" "I was lonely," she said, her voice cracking. "You were so distant, so focused on work. Greg was just there." I clenched my fists, struggling to keep my composure. "So that's your excuse? I wasn't paying enough attention to you, so you decided to screw the guy who filmed our wedding?" "It wasn't like that," she insisted. "I never meant to hurt you." "Well, congratulations," I said bitterly. "You succeeded anyway." The silence that followed was deafening. I couldn't stay here. Not with her. Not with the weight of this betrayal suffocating me. "I'm done," I said finally, my voice hollow. "I can't do this anymore." "Matt, please," she begged, reaching for me. But I stepped back, putting distance between us. "You made your choice, Sarah," I said coldly. "Now I'm making mine." Without another word, I walked past her, out of the office and out of the life we'd built together. The truth had shattered everything, and there was no going back. 6 months had passed since I walked out of that house, and yet the memories still clung to me like shadows I couldn't shake. Betrayal doesn't fade quickly. It carves scars into your soul, reminders of what was lost, and lessons you wish you never had to learn. I'd moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much, just a modest space with creaky floors and walls thin enough to hear the neighbors argue. But it was mine, a sanctuary far from the echoes of Sarah's lies. The divorce had been swift and clinical. I wasn't interested in drawn-out battles over furniture or savings. I just wanted freedom, clean and uncomplicated. Sarah, surprisingly, hadn't fought me on much. Maybe guilt had silenced her protests, or maybe she realized she'd already lost the most important battle. My trust. I'd agreed to joint custody of the kids. They were the only bright light in this mess, two innocent hearts caught in the crossfire of their parents' broken marriage. Every week when they stayed with me, the apartment filled with laughter again, a reminder that not everything in life was tainted by betrayal. Still, some nights were harder than others. There were moments when I replayed that footage in my mind, a painful loop I couldn't escape. The raw footage, the kiss, Sarah's desperate pleas afterward. I wondered if Greg ever thought about the damage he'd caused or if he'd moved on without a second thought. I didn't care enough to find out. Healing is strange, uneven, and unpredictable. Some days I felt stronger, like I was stepping into a version of myself I hadn't seen in years. Other days I sank into bitterness, questioning what had been real and what had been fantasy. But life has a way of moving forward, whether you're ready or not. One evening, as I was packing the kids' lunchboxes for school the next day, my phone buzzed on the counter. A familiar name lit up the screen. Sarah. I stared at it for a moment, debating whether to answer. Curiosity won. Hello? Hey, Matt, she said, her voice soft but hesitant. What is it? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. I wanted to say I'm sorry, she said quietly. I know that probably doesn't mean much now, but I need you to know that I regret what happened. Silence stretched between us. I didn't rush to fill it. I hurt you in ways I can't take back, she continued, her voice trembling, and I'll spend the rest of my life regretting that. I exhaled slowly, surprised by the absence of anger. Time had dulled the sharp edges of my pain, leaving behind something quieter. Not forgiveness exactly, but acceptance. I appreciate you saying that, I said finally. Another pause, heavy but not hostile. You're a good dad, she added softly. The kids love their time with you. A lump formed in my throat, but I pushed it down. Thanks. After we hung up, I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty room. The weight of the past was still there, but it didn't crush me anymore. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let Sarah's betrayal define the rest of my life. I deserved better than living in the shadow of someone else's mistakes. So I signed up for a woodworking class I'd always talked about taking. I started running again, finding solace in the rhythm of my feet pounding against the pavement. I even went on a couple of dates. Nothing serious, but enough to remind myself that love, though risky, was still possible. And most importantly, I found myself again. The man who'd been buried under years of routine, work stress, and a marriage that had quietly unraveled long before Greg entered the picture. He was still there, waiting to be rediscovered. Life doesn't offer tidy endings. It's messy, unpredictable, and sometimes unfair. But standing there in my modest little apartment, listening to the sound of my kids laughing from the next room, I realized something. I wasn't broken anymore. I was whole, not because I'd forgotten the past, but because I'd survived it. And that was enough.